Hola, ¿qué hay? ¿Cómo estás? Soy Jacinto Yorca y bienvenido a este canal donde ya sabes que habitualmente hablamos de retail, de marketing, de management y de liderazgo. En el vídeo de hoy continuamos explorando esta entrevista exclusiva que se grabó hace muchos años, poco antes de su fallecimiento, a Peter Drucker. Te dejo en los comentarios o en la descripción del vídeo los anteriores capítulos de esta entrevista que vamos a seguir explorando juntos y comentamos. Recuerda, ten a mano un bolígrafo, un lápiz, algo para escribir y papel, porque las enseñanzas de Drucker son eternas.
I think it's important to ask what can an executive do today to prepare himself or herself to be effective tomorrow. One of the things we know is that the next, I don't know how many years, but long years, will be turbulent years because the speed of change is so great. Whether you're talking demographics, people, where the developed world is on a baby strike. Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal, southern France have almost no babies born.
Estamos hablando de que esta entrevista tiene prácticamente 30 años y ya está anticipando Drucker algo que él ya estaba viendo sobre esta dificultad en la natalidad. En el caso de España, que es mi país, te comento, hay más perros y animales domésticos censados que nacimientos. Y realmente tenemos, en el caso de España, hay una pirámide poblacional invertida que va a suponer una dificultad muy importante a medio plazo. Entonces, fíjate, Drucker siempre pues visionario y siempre pues anticipándose al futuro, que es lo que va este capítulo.
Japan is predicted 60 years from now will have about half the population because part of your babies is born. And on the other hand, in the developed countries, the number of old people is growing very fast. So you can predict that in the developed countries, demographics will become a major issue. And yes, in developed countries, but perhaps not yet in emerging countries, we will have to learn to work with people very much older than we used to work with, because the idea, even in the US, that you can retire at 65 is no longer tenable. And that's a major change. But also, the business enterprise has come to play quite a new role. Economically, the world is becoming increasingly integrated. Politically, it's becoming increasingly splintered. And the business enterprise is very much in the middle. One of the major mistakes of my professional life is that I invented the term profit center. There is no such thing. Inside a business, there are only cost centers. The only profit center is the customer whose check hasn't bounced. And we know nothing about the outside. The retail people know more than anybody else because when that housewife pays at the checkout counter, there's a record. I work a lot with hospitals. It is very hard to figure out the outside, let alone results. When you make a part to be assembled by one of your customers, you may know a lot about that customer, but you know almost nothing about his customers. And yet his customers are your ultimate customers. because if that direct customer of yours can't sell his automobile he manufactures, you don't get an order either.
A esto hay que comentar que es cierto que la tecnología y lo que sabemos ahora de las ventas y de lo que estamos haciendo, pues es verdad que esta brecha que antes había de conocimiento entre el fabricante y el consumidor final, pasando por el distribuidor o proveedor o mayorista, cada vez hay mucha más información y es cierto que los fabricantes, su intención y su conocimiento del mercado final es cada vez más potente. Sin ir más lejos, muchas de las conferencias que yo hago en eventos al cabo del año son para fabricantes que invitan a mi workshop o a mi conferencia a sus distribuidores con la finalidad de que mejoren, de que aprendan, de que ambicionen más en sus puntos de venta de cara a que mejore pues, lo que ellos están haciendo con el consumidor final. Entonces, esto que dice Drucker obviamente es muy interesante, es cierto, pero también es cierto que en estos últimos tiempos es algo que se ha ido mejorando. No obstante, ha ido mejorando para las empresas, obviamente, que hagan uso de la información. Las empresas que no trabajen con su canal de distribución no van a tener esa información final del consumidor, que es lo que al final pues, es lo más potente.
And so, one of the important tasks for the executive head is to try to obtain more knowledge about the outside, both geographically and topically. And I'm always being asked by clients, what do I do? And I learned that from an old client of mine who built a very successful company before he died, much too young, he was barely 60. He made it a law in his company that he and every one of his entire management group, down to supervisors in the plant, twice a year for 2 weeks, takes the place of a salesman or saleswoman on vacation. So for 4 weeks they were outside selling. And that built his company. This was in the healthcare field, and 10 years before anybody else, he realized the changes in both American, Canadian, and Japanese healthcare, and directed his company, a hospital supply business, towards their new customers. And he had a 10-year advantage. And so obtaining knowledge about the outside, and that means not just your customers, but your non-customers. In every business except the government monopoly, there are more people who don't buy your product or your service than people who buy it. Nobody has more. 50% of the market is very rare. Leading companies typically have about 24% or thereabouts. So 75% of the people who could be your customers, who might be your customers, are not. Why not? Long distance learning. We figure in 5 years we will deliver 70% of our course material in a management center off campus via satellite. And we may underrate it. And so the outside is something in which, not that anybody can tell you executive yet how to acquire them, but that's why now when I sit down with the executives, I say, what magazines do you read? What books do you read? And see, you are learning more and more about less and less. And yet you are not in the electronics business. but the whole industry is going there. So you better start subscribing to good electronics magazines.
Más que revistas de electrónica, si está leyendo los subtítulos, aquí está equivocado, ¿no? Lo que él dice son publicaciones electrónicas. Hoy en día hablaríamos de newsletters, hablaríamos de qué cuentas clave en redes sociales sigues, ya sea de Twitter, de LinkedIn, de YouTube, como esta, que por cierto, suscríbete ahora mismo si no lo has hecho. Y en definitiva, a qué fuentes de información estás conectado. Y hoy en día, pues es interesante porque hay multitud, y hay que seleccionar bien, porque ahí fuera hay cosas que no son interesantes o que nos pueden hacer perder tiempo. Pero aquí ya estaba diciendo Drucker hace ya un montón de años, esos directivos, oiga, usted a qué está conectado, qué es lo que está recibiendo, porque necesitas estar continuamente aprendiendo.
Know nothing about, you're a technical person. You better read a good management magazine so that you get a glimpse of outside. And that is becoming more and more important. But also realize that we are building organizations around knowledge now. And knowledge is a very peculiar resource. All the resources changed very, very little. My name is a Dutch name. It means printer, and my ancestors were printers in Amsterdam for 250 years. They began shortly after printing was invented, 50 years later, lasted till the end of the 18th century, and during the entire almost 3 centuries, they did not have to learn anything new. That skill did not change. And today, an engineer, a physician, a lawyer, an accountant, a service manager who is not back to refresh his knowledge for 3 or 4 years becomes obsolete very, very fast, incredibly fast. And so you, to prepare yourself for the future, better learn to build continuous learning into your own life. It may be going to a management meeting and listen to an expert. It may be reading this book, certainly magazines. It may be even going back to the university for an advanced management program. But build that stimulation that you realize how much is going on. A good deal of it will not affect you in your business, but quite a bit will, and if you then are overtaken by it. In the last 40 years, more old companies have been put out of business by rivals of whose very existence they didn't even know than at any time in history, because the competition now comes. You are in pharmaceutical, the competition comes from genetics and biomedicine, of which you know nothing. You are in the telephone business, and in this country, the internet is becoming a very serious competitor. The younger people don't use a telephone. And for the first time since the telephone was invented, telephone use and telephone subscription go down quite fast. And those people in the telephone companies had never heard of the internet. That was not our business. Our voice communications, either via cable or via satellite. And the younger people don't use the telephone.
Que es súper
They use
visionario.
electronic mail.
Y ahora hablaríamos de WhatsApp, ya hablaríamos de la mensajería, de las redes sociales, que cómo ha cambiado el uso que si uno pensaba que iba a tener ciertos elementos, ¿no? Ciertos dispositivos, claro que sí. El teléfono al final, y si nos vamos, ¿no?, a esas necesidades, es cuando a veces me he encontrado con personas, incluso a veces con alumnos, ¿no?, en formaciones de marketing o incluso en algún máster de marketing en posgrado, que dicen: Jacinto, es que las necesidades se pueden crear porque no teníamos ninguna necesidad de tener teléfonos móviles o celulares y ahora pues eso nos crearon esa necesidad. No, error, las necesidades no se crean, lo que hacemos es descubrirlas y potenciarlas en todo caso desde el marketing. Y aquí la necesidad no era tener un dispositivo móvil para poder hablar con alguien, la necesidad era la comunicación. Y esa comunicación puede responderse bien con un teléfono celular, como nos dice, bueno, o con un teléfono, o bien, pues como dice aquí ya Drucker, es decir, la gente evoluciona y los jóvenes, pues aquí ya dice, usan internet, el correo electrónico, y lo que hoy estaríamos hablando es pues de todas esas redes sociales, de mensajería instantánea y demás. Un visionario, ¿eh? Alucinante.
And so you better know what goes on. And perhaps one final important caveat, least important to you in Latin America because you're old hands. You have learned the hard way to manage your currency exposure. In countries with built-in inflation, you learn that. Though, if you don't mind my saying that, you are not necessarily very good at it. We, in the developed countries, still, you'll be surprised how many business people still believe that the Bible begins with the words, in the beginning, God created stable currencies. The Bible begins with the word, in the beginning there was chaos. And that is what currencies are. And accept the fact that this isn't going to change. As all of you know, the Europeans have not really been able to get one currency because no one country was willing to give up its fiscal independence, and that's not going to change for a long time.
Posteriormente sí hubo una moneda única europea, el euro, ¿vale?, que hoy conocemos, no con todos los países que hubiese querido, e incluso ya sabemos, ¿no?, Reino Unido forma parte de la Unión Europea, pero no estaba integrado en la divisa única euro, y hace pues relativamente poco tiempo decidió abandonar la Unión Europea como tal, obviamente el continente europeo no, porque está en Europa, pero sí la Unión Europea como esa alianza estratégica y geopolítica y geosocial y geoeconómica de muchos países europeos. Pero aquí, fijaos, ya como Drucker dice cosas tan interesantes. Es un visionario, sin duda.
And yet, more and more businesses are exposed either as buyers or as sellers, or very often as debtors or creditors. And so managing currencies is becoming an important task. It's got to be done for the entire enterprise in one place. Well, that's one reason where even the most decentralized multinational company is thoroughly centralized in currency management. And it's got to be taken seriously because overnight a currency devalues and you lose more than you can possibly earn during a year's honest, hard work making your product or delivering your service. And so currency management, well, we know quite a bit, not nearly enough, but quite a bit, is one of the things. an executive has to learn to be prepared for the future. But above all, he has to be prepared, or she, for change. And so you also have to learn how one introduces change. One doesn't do it the way most of us do it and most governments do it. A change for the whole country overnight never works. Think through the new policy, the new product, the new service. Find somebody in your company who really believes in it, who wants it, on one condition, that this person also enjoys the respect of your organization. And then let him or her pilot it. First, everything new has to be changed. Everything new gets into trouble. And then you need somebody who is a champion, who is committed to it. But you also need to do it where if it goes wrong, it doesn't kill your company. And it better be somebody who is respected in the organization, so that people say, I still don't understand that, but it works for Jorgen. And I've learned that Jorgen has results. For 10 years, he has performed. I respect him. And if he says, try it, it works, I'll do it. So you will learn to build the management of change into your organization, but also into your life. Because one thing is predictable, that the period of turbulence and change is not over. Only 40 years ago, 30 years ago, the most intelligent man in management was a Japanese, Kenichi Omai, predicted that only the developed countries matter. He calls them the triad. In the last 20 years, the developed countries have not done very well. US best of all, then Japan, Europe has done very badly. And yet world production has grown faster than ever before, and world trade even faster. Because the Pacific Rim countries and some countries in Latin America didn't even notice that Japan was in deep depression. Europe didn't move, and the US was very uneven. There is no more key currency, there is no more key country. Development can happen any place, and that makes for a very turbulent time. And so one cannot predict the future, but one can prepare for it. And again, this is Peter Drucker speaking in Claremont, California.
Drucker nos habla de la importancia de prepararse para el futuro, nos habla de la importancia de estar en continua evolución, en continuo movimiento, donde los países pueden estar no en su mejor momento, pero la vida transcurre, y lo que aquí nos decía, en aquel momento pues decía Estados Unidos, Europa, tal, ni se mueve, pero hay otros países donde ocurren cosas. Por tanto, esto en esta idea global de los negocios, en esta idea global del mundo que existe hoy en día, pues es importante que lo tengamos en cuenta. Bueno, espero que estas enseñanzas de Peter Drucker te han sido útiles. Para mí la verdad es que son alucinantes, es mi fuente de inspiración, sin ninguna duda. Y seguiré trabajando en ello. Bueno, oye, espero que te haya gustado, que haya sido interesante. O no lo olvides, ya sabes, yo tengo que insistir en esto porque al final es lo que me da energía para seguir subiendo vídeos. Suscríbete y haz me gusta y deja tu comentario, pues, oye, ¿qué te ha parecido esto? Y hacia dónde crees que podemos seguir estudiando estas filosofías de Drucker. ¿En qué se aplica en tu día a día? Nos seguimos viendo, cuídate mucho, muchas gracias por estar aquí, un abrazo, hasta pronto.